Right now, beneath the sole of your foot, moving through the walls, wandering through your garden soil, roaming around your kitchen counter, there's a swarm of ants everywhere. Nearly 20 quadrillion ants are alive on Earth right now. That's almost 2.5 million ants for every human being. If you calculated their total mass accurately, they would outweigh all wild mammals and birds combined. Think about that for a minute or two. If you placed every vertebrate on Earth filling the forests, plains, and oceans on one side of a scale, and all the ants on the other, the ants would tip the balance. These insects have been living on Earth for nearly 130 million years. While dinosaurs walked around the planet, ants were already building colonies, farming, and keeping slaves. And now, here we are, usually thinking of ants as nothing more than a nuisance tiny black bugs swarming around breadcrumbs. But if you think ants are just insects that gather crumbs or scraps of food, you're mistaken, because ants are actually incredibly beneficial to the ecosystem. Now let's take a look together at the biology, anatomy, and life of these amazing insects. An ant's body structure is truly a masterpiece, a marvel in 3 parts. If you want to get to know ants, you should start with their bodies, because that tiny frame is a remarkably sophisticated structure perfectly shaped by evolution. Like all insects, an ant's body consists of 3 main parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. But in ants, these sections are connected by extraordinary joints. The region between the thorax and abdomen, which scientists call the petiole, is quite flexible. This flexibility allows ants to bend their bodies at nearly any angle, giving them a serious advantage both while working and while fighting. An ant's head functions like a genuine command center: 2 compound eyes, usually 3 simple eyes, ocelli, 2 antennae, and mouth parts. All of this is packed into that tiny, remarkable structure. And ants' eyes are quite unusual too. Many ant species have compound eyes that give them a wide field of view, but in terms of sharpness, ants don't see very clearly. So an ant can see and notice you, but it likely perceives you as a blur. Some ant species that live underground are completely blind, since there's no need for eyes in an environment without light. Evolution doesn't keep useless things around. Antennae are one of the most important sensory organs ants have. They don't just detect smell, they also sense vibration, use them as a sense of touch, detect humidity and heat, and can even perceive sound at certain frequencies. When an ant touches a surface with its antenna, it can gather more information about that surface than you could with your hand. And an ant's antennae are constantly moving. An ant scans its surroundings dozens of times per second, recording the information into memory. Overpowering prey, carrying seeds, digging through soil, fighting enemies, carrying their young, these insects do all of this with just 1 pair of jaws. But here's the interesting part. Mandibles vary remarkably from species to species. Army ants, Eciton, have long jaws shaped like swords, evolved purely for tearing things apart and killing. Harvester ants have thick, powerful jaws. Harvester ants love seeds, and their mouths are like nutcrackers. Let's take a look at the ant's thorax. Its main purpose is to enable movement. An ant's 6 legs are attached to the thorax. Each leg is jointed and extremely strong. Ants are strong enough to lift 10 to 50 times their own body weight. Comparing this to a human, for a person to do the same, they wouldn't need to lift 70 kilograms, they'd need to lift 700 to 3,500 kilograms. In a weightlifting competition, ants would crush us every time. At the tips of an ant's legs are tiny hooks and sticky pads. These structures let ants cling to nearly any surface: smooth glass, concrete, even ceilings. Isn't that an amazing feature? Some ant species can even cling to leaves during rainy weather. Let's look at the ant's abdomen. This is where the digestive system, reproductive organs, and in most ant species, a venom gland are located. The stinger that gives bees their fearsome reputation also exists in ants. But over the course of evolution, some ants lost their stingers. Today, most ant species defend themselves either by biting or by spraying formic acid from their abdomen. That stinging sensation you feel when an ant bites you is largely caused by this acid touching your skin. In fact, the name formic acid comes from the ant itself, Formica, means ant in Latin. How are ants so incredibly strong? The mystery behind ants' remarkable strength lies in physics. The force a muscle produces is roughly proportional to its cross-sectional area. So if you double the thickness of a muscle, you get nearly 4 times the force. But the weight you actually need to lift scales with your volume, that is, with the cube of your size. As you shrink, your muscles stay proportionally strong relative to your body, while the mass you need to lift decreases relatively. Put simply, ants appear so strong because they're small insects. The physics of a large animal produces much more interesting results in a small body. If you scaled up an ant to human size, and yes, scientists do ask this kind of what-if question, it would actually end up weaker than a human because muscles don't scale proportionally. Did that surprise you? If so, let us know in the comments. But let me say this, an ant's real strength isn't found in biophysical tricks. Their true power lies elsewhere. An ant's brain is smaller than a grain of rice. Inside it are nearly 1 million neurons. A human brain, by comparison, has 86 billion neurons. Yet with such a tiny brain, ants find their way, make plans, communicate with each other, and learn. So how do these tiny creatures manage to do all of this? The answer lies partly in individual nervous systems being more capable than we imagine, but mostly it's hidden in collective intelligence. If you take a single ant and leave it on its own, you'll mostly see a very limited range of behavior. It wanders in circles, repeats simple patterns, and tends to get lost. But within a colony, when thousands or millions of ants act together, an intelligence emerges that doesn't exist in any single ant. This is called collective intelligence, or in some contexts, swarm intelligence. How does this happen? Through chemical signals called pheromones. Ants constantly lay down chemical trails, read them, and respond to them. When an ant finds food, it leaves a trail on its way back home. Other ants notice this trail and follow it. Better food sources get stronger trails reinforced, while weak food sources have trails that evaporate and disappear. No single ant says, "Go this way, don't take from there." Yet the system organizes itself toward the best possible resource entirely on its own. This is quite literally a biological algorithm. Computer scientists have spent decades observing this pattern and trying to translate it into digital systems. A technique known as ant colony optimization is essentially an accurate imitation of this pheromone-based mechanism. Let's slow down a bit on the topic of ant communication because it's genuinely fascinating. Humans communicate using a 26-letter alphabet, sounds and words built from those sounds. The alphabet of ants is made of chemical compounds. A single ant species can produce 10 to 20 different pheromones released from different glands: alarm pheromones, trail pheromones, recognition pheromones, reproductive pheromones, and many more. And it's not just their presence or absence that conveys information, the concentration does too. When ants are highly agitated, an alarm pheromone might mean immediate danger, fight, while at lower concentrations it might mean be careful, something's around. These signals can also combine. When multiple pheromones are present at once, the responses blend together, forming more complex messages. Linguists debate whether this truly counts as a language. In the end, there's no grammar, no syntax, no imagination involved. But functionally, it succeeds in conveying information and coordinating behavior. Maybe it doesn't count as language, but it is genuinely communication. Here's the strange part. Ants don't only use these signals among their own kind. Some insect and plant species have figured out how to hack ant pheromones. Butterfly larvae mimic the pheromone of baby ants, sneaking into ant colonies to feed there. Plants, meanwhile, produce excess floral nectar to essentially use ants as bodyguards when ants settle in. Harmful insects tend to stay away. Chemical communication has evolved so perfectly in nature that it offers both advantage and exploitability. The caste system is the core structural element of a complex society. When you think of an ant colony, you probably picture worker ants, queen ants, male ants. That's true, but it's a drastically oversimplified picture. The reality is far more detailed. The title queen is one of the most misunderstood titles there is. The queen doesn't give detailed orders, doesn't command other ants, doesn't say, you do this, you carry that. Her only purpose is to lay eggs. It's the worker ants who maintain the flow of information throughout the colony, gather input, and adapt to daily operations. Biologically, the queen functions like an egg-laying machine, and the scale of her output can be staggering. In some species, a queen can lay nearly 30,000 eggs a day, and millions over her lifetime. The queen's lifespan is also remarkably long. In some species, she can live 20 to 30 years, an extraordinarily long life compared to other insects. And here's an interesting detail. Worker ants, despite sharing the same genetics, live only a few months, sometimes just a few weeks, while the queen, genetically identical, lives for decades. The reason for this difference isn't fully understood even now. Diet, hormones, stress levels, microbiome, all of these are contributing factors, but the full picture remains complicated. Male ants are perhaps the most tragic members of the colony. Their only role is to mate with a new queen. That's the entire reason they exist. They're born, they grow, they rise up for the mating flight, and shortly afterward, they usually die. In some species, males die within minutes of mating. Their reproductive organs detach from their bodies during the act. This may be one of the rare situations where we can be grateful ants can't scream, ouch. Worker ants are the true backbone of the colony, and the word worker doesn't refer to a single uniform group. It actually represents an internally differentiated structure. In many species, worker ants are divided into subgroups based on size and physiology. Small workers called minors, medium-sized workers, and large workers called majors or soldiers. Each group takes on different responsibilities. For example, in leafcutter ants, genus Atta, the largest workers cut and carry leaves, medium-sized workers tend the fungus garden, and the smallest workers ride on top of the carried leaves to fight off parasitic flies that try to lay eggs on them. So that tiny ant riding on a carried leaf fragment is essentially acting as dedicated protection for that piece of leaf. A queen ant's journey, how does a new ant colony begin? This process is one of the most powerful examples of the struggle to survive. Every year, mature colonies produce new reproductive females and males. These individuals are born with wings. Yes, ants can have wings, not just the worker ants most of us are familiar with. During the mating flight season, usually in warm and humid conditions, they disperse from the colony. Known as the nuptial flight, this event is a mass mating occurrence. Nearly all colonies in a wide area take flight at roughly the same time, following weather conditions, the season, and chemical cues. This synchronized mating is hugely important because it prevents inbreeding reproductive females, and males from different colonies meet each other in the air. After mating ends, the reproductive females land on the ground. Their first task is to shed their wings since they're no longer useful. Then they try to find a nest on their own with no workers, no food, in a world already full of enemies looking to take advantage of any newly established colony. They raise their first eggs using their own bodily resources. Their flight muscles break down and are used as a food source. The muscles once used for flying are now converted into growth energy. During this process, the queen is often forced to consume some of her own initial eggs simply because she has no other option. Once the first worker ants appear, the colony finally begins to expand outward. But these first workers tend to be small and weak due to the harsh conditions. Over time, as conditions improve and the colony grows, the workers become stronger and larger. The success rate throughout this process is remarkably low. More than 95% of reproductive females that take part in a nuptial flight die before establishing a colony, whether eaten by birds and insects, unable to survive the dryness, or for other reasons. The small number of surviving queens lay the foundation for colonies that can last for decades. Calling ant homes simple is like calling a termite mound a tent. That's a pretty inaccurate description, too. The structure of underground ant nests is an extraordinary feat of engineering. Chambers are distributed according to specific purposes: egg chambers, larva chambers, pupa chambers, food storage, waste areas. None of this placement is random. Eggs and larvae are usually kept at depths with the most ideal temperature and humidity. As conditions change throughout the day, whether it's hot or cold, worker ants move the young accordingly, behaving almost like a thermostat, positioning the brood along temperature gradients. In large colonies, entrances and exits are physically organized into distinct zones, much like the ventilation system of a building. Perfect tunnels exist to disperse stale air and let fresh air in. To manage excess carbon dioxide, some worker ants even act as pumps, flapping to create air circulation within the tunnels. Scientists studying native West African macroterms termites, yes, these are a termite species, but they follow similar principles, found ventilation shafts rising 40 to 60 meters within their mounds. Ant nests can reach impressively deep levels too. In Brazil, an abandoned leafcutter ant colony was cast in concrete. The resulting shape reached nearly 8 meters deep, representing about 50 tons of moved earth, essentially forming the image of an underground city. Some ant species don't build their homes underground at all. Weaver ants, Ocophila, build nests out of leaves. They pull leaf edges together using silk produced by their larvae. Worker ants carry the larvae in their mouths and use them like a glue gun, sealing the leaf edges together. During this process, the larva secretes silk, while the worker ant moves it in whatever direction is needed. A living tool being operated by a living creature, it's a genuinely fascinating and remarkable thing. Humans discovered agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago, a truly remarkable achievement for both humans and animals. Wouldn't you agree? Leafcutter ants discovered this practice 50 million years ago. Species in the genera Atta and Acromyrmex carry cut leaf fragments down to underground gardens, but the ants don't actually eat the leaves themselves. Their stomachs can't digest them. Instead, the leaves serve as a substrate for growing a particular fungus. The colony cultivates this fungus, tends to it, protects it from disease, and eventually consumes it. This is a symbiotic relationship, to the point where neither side can survive independently anymore. The fungus species, Leucoagaricus, is now almost non-existent in the wild for millions of years. It has survived only within ant colonies, and the ants in turn cannot build large colonies without cultivating this fungus. But it doesn't stop there. Colonies also use bacteria to protect the fungus from disease. Bacteria, usually of the genus Pseudonocardia, live on the bodies of worker ants and produce antibiotics that protect the fungus gardens from parasitic molds that would otherwise destroy them. So here's the full picture: a fungus farm, protected by a bacterially produced antibiotic system, fed by leaf-carrying worker ants, all run by an ant colony. Agriculture, antibiotic countermeasures, and multi-layered symbiosis all combined. Humans discovered penicillin in 1928. Ants have been running this chemical warfare for 50 million years. Not every ant species farms. Many are gatherers and hunters. But even in this seemingly simple lifestyle, there are impressive adaptations. Harvester ant species, genera Mesor and Pogonomyrmex, especially those living in arid and semi-arid regions, have mastered seed collection. They can walk for days in search of seeds. Some individual ants travel hundreds of meters from the nest, a distance that, scaled to their body size, would be equivalent to thousands of kilometers for a human. Collected seeds are stored and secured in chambers. But moisture can cause seeds to sprout, and once sprouted, a seed is no longer useful as food. To prevent this, some harvester ant species chemically neutralize the enzymes in seeds that are beginning to germinate, essentially pasteurizing them. This way, seeds can be stored for a much longer time. Honeypot ants, Myrmecocystis, found a genuinely different solution. Certain worker ants literally become living storage containers. These workers, called repletes, consume the sweet liquids brought by other workers and swell their abdomens up like balloons until they resemble tiny grapes. These individuals hang from the ceilings of underground chambers, and during times of famine, the colony retrieves the stored food by squeezing them. This might look strange, but it's a remarkably effective solution. For ant species living in hot, dry environments, long dry seasons are a survival crisis. These living storage units function much like the wells and cisterns humans build, gathering reserves of water and energy for later use. Army ants are among nature's most formidable ant species. Unlike other ants, they don't build permanent homes. Instead, they're constantly on the move, relocating within just a few weeks. The colony carries its home with it. During stationary phases, worker ants link their own bodies together to form a living mass. This structure, called a bivouac, consists of hundreds of thousands of ants hanging onto each other's legs, waists, and bodies, forming an enormous cluster. Inside it, the queen, eggs, larvae, and pupae are kept safe. During the migratory phase, the colony moves as a unit. At the front, hunting ants advance and consume anything in their path: insects, tarantulas, snakes, small mammals, anything unfortunate enough to be in the way. This swarm, moving forward like a stream several meters wide, is called siafu by local peoples in Swahili, and animals are thought to flee ahead of it. But what army ants actually attack is usually not what movies would have us believe. A healthy human or a large animal can easily move out of the way. The real risk is to animals that are injured, sick, or trapped and unable to move. Also, these army ants genuinely serve as ecosystem cleaners, providing real ecological benefit, clearing the areas they pass through of harmful insects and breaking down dead organic matter. Army ants are also remarkable bridge builders. When they encounter a gap, worker ants climb on top of one another to form a living bridge. The length, size, and structure of this bridge adjust dynamically based on the colony's traffic. When too many ants are crossing, the bridge widens. When fewer are crossing, it narrows. This dynamic optimization happens without any central management, purely through local rules. There's something in ant life called social parasitism, and it's genuinely unsettling. Some ant species raid the colonies of different ant species to steal their eggs and larvae. These stolen young grow up within the thief colony and spend their entire lives forced to work for a different species, essentially as slaves. Some researchers avoid using this term, but it's the established terminology. Ants of the genus Polyergus have mastered this. Furthermore, the antennae of these ants have a rather long structure. They attack the nests of Formica ant species, steal pupae, and carry them back to their own colony. When the stolen Formica workers grow up, they adapt to the colony they were raised in, behaving as if it were their own from the start. What makes this even more interesting is that when enslaved ants become numerous enough, they sometimes rebel. Enslaved Formica workers have been observed killing Polyergus larvae they were carrying in their mouths and damaging the nest. Researchers seriously call this a slave revolt. When this observation was first published, it was quite controversial, but subsequent studies have supported it. There are milder forms of social parasitism too. The queens of some ant species successfully infiltrate an unrelated colony and kill the resident queen. Over time, the worker ants become accustomed to the new queen, as her pheromones gradually shift to match. Eventually, the entire colony ends up raising the invading queen's offspring. No worker ant is even aware of this gradual transition happening. Ant behavior in nature isn't limited to gathering and hunting. Their relationships with plants are genuinely unusual and remarkable. There are plant species called myrmecophytes that have evolved specific adaptations tailored to ants. Among the best known are acacia trees. The thorns of these acacias are hollow. Inside the tree essentially forms a ready-made ant home. Additionally, at the base of their leaves, they produce small structures called Beltian bodies, made of protein and fat, and their young leaves secrete nectar as a sugar reserve. So what do the trees get in return? Ants such as Pseudomarmex ferrugineus live on these trees and aggressively drive away insects, fungi, and even the encroaching shoots of other plants that threaten the tree. Studies have shown they even bite away surrounding vegetation to keep the area around the tree clear. This symbiosis is so strong that it's been tested experimentally. Acacia trees stripped of their ants become overtaken by competing plants and suffer insect infestations within just a few months. Plants also make use of ants in other ways in a phenomenon called myrmecockery, seed dispersal by ants. Certain plant species produce seeds with a fat and protein-rich appendage called an eleosome. Ants carry these seeds back to their nest to consume this appendage. The seed itself is discarded in the waste area, which happens to be a nutrient-rich, moderately moist, and generally ideal spot for germination. A significant part of forest floor plant diversity is safeguarded by this very mechanism. When ant populations decline, certain plant distributions shift accordingly. Ants show up in some interesting corners of human history, too. Medical stitches. In the traditional medicine of some African and American societies, ants with large mandibles were used to close wounds. The ant would be positioned to bite across the two edges of the wound, then its body would be snapped off, leaving the head and mandibles clamped in place, a natural stitch. In human psychology, ants have long served as a symbol of teamwork, ambition, and unity. Aesop's fable, The Ant and the Grasshopper, has passed down a thousands-year-old lesson about preparation and effort. In modern science, ants are the subject of billions of dollars in research. Robot swarm design, logistics optimization algorithms, drug development, material science. The strength of ant silk ants serve as a model organism for all of these fields. The collective intelligence displayed by an ant colony, despite not having even 1 million combined neurons in any single individual, has inspired engineers working on artificial neural networks. Digital machines are attempting to replicate the marvels of this pre-digital age system. Whatever perspective you take on ants, here's one thing worth noting. Once you understand them, you can never look at them the same way again, can you? That tiny black speck next to a crumb isn't a nuisance. It's a remarkable representative of millions of years of evolutionary process. Communicating through a chemical language, thinking collectively, contributing to agriculture, understanding medicine, understanding engineering, waging war, and making peace. One of the greatest examples proving that a creature's significance can't be measured by its size is the ant, and ants themselves are aware of this fact. Before you look down at the ground beneath your feet, pause for a moment. Let a masterpiece millions of years in the making come to mind: the ants. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like it, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications. Goodbye.